The air in the rose gardens of Phrygia hung heavy, saturated with the cloying scent of overripe fruit, spilled wine, and the sweat of a 10-day revelry. For a week and a half, King Midas had played the host, turning his palace into a sanctuary for a guest who was less of a man and more of a force of nature. Silenus, the tutor of the gods, the ancient satyr found lost and rambling in the vines, had finally fallen silent. The sun was beginning to dip below the western hills, casting long, bruised shadows across the marble terraces. The feasting tables were a wreckage of excess, overturned goblets, bones of roasted fowl, and stains of purple vintage that looked uncomfortably like old blood. Midas stood on the edge of the terrace, his hands gripping the stone railing. His knuckles were white. He was not drunk. While his court, his servants, and the satyr had lost themselves in the delirium of the festival, Midas had remained sober, watchful, and calculating. He knew who Silenus was. More importantly, he knew who was coming for him. It was not every day a mortal king held leverage over a god. "He will come," Midas whispered to the wind. "He must." As if the earth itself heard him, the wind shifted. The heavy, stagnant air of the aftermath was suddenly sliced through by a breeze that smelled of ozone, wild pine, and crushed grapes. The birds in the royal aviary fell silent. The crickets ceased their chirping. Then came the sound. It started as a hum in the ground, a vibration that rattled the silver cups on the tables. It grew into the sound of pipes, pan flutes playing a melody that was at once joyous and terrifyingly chaotic. From the edge of the forest that bordered the palace grounds, the shadows seemed to lengthen and detach themselves from the trees. Out of the twilight stepped a procession that made the Phrygian guards drop their spears in awe. Leopards walked without leashes, their golden eyes glowing in the dusk. Maenads, women with ivy woven into their hair and madness in their eyes, danced with fluid, impossible grace. And in the center of them all, walking not on the ground, but seemingly floating an inch above the grass, was Dionysus, the god of wine, the liberator, the twice-born. He did not look like the statues Midas had commissioned. The statues were cold, hard marble. The being standing before him was vibrant, shifting, and terrifyingly alive. He looked young, eternally on the cusp of manhood, with skin that seemed to hold the flush of wine, and eyes that held the depth of a starless night. He wore a leopard skin draped over one shoulder, and held a thyrsus, a staff of giant fennel topped with a pine cone, loosely in one hand.
Midas straightened his spine. He smoothed his robes. He was a king, he reminded himself. He was the ruler of Phrygia. He would not cower. Dionysus moved through the garden, the grass springing up greener where his sandals passed. He ignored the trembling servants and walked straight to where Silenus lay snoring on a pile of silk cushions. The god looked down at his old tutor with an expression of infinite tenderness, a look so human it startled Midas. Dionysus reached out and brushed a stray vine from the satyr's forehead. "You wandered far, old friend," Dionysus said, his voice like the sound of wine being poured into a crystal glass, smooth, liquid, and intoxicating. Silenus stirred, opening one bleary eye. Upon seeing the god, the old satyr let out a belch that echoed off the palace walls, then grinned. "The wine here is acceptable, my boy, but the company is strategic." Dionysus turned his gaze toward Midas. For a moment, the king felt as though he had been struck in the chest. To be looked at by a god was to feel one's own insignificance. It was to feel the fragility of one's bones and the brevity of one's life. "King Midas," Dionysus said. He didn't shout, yet his voice carried to every corner of the garden. Midas bowed, low and respectful, but not servile. "Lord Dionysus, your teacher has been an honored guest in my halls. We have treated him with the reverence due to one who shaped a god." Dionysus smiled, and the air temperature seemed to rise 10 degrees. "I see that. You found him lost, drunk, and vulnerable. You could have chained him. You could have mocked him. Instead, you gave him 10 days of your best wine and your softest beds." "It was my duty," Midas lied smoothly. "It was an investment," his mind corrected. The god walked up the marble stairs of the terrace, the leopards trailing him like obedient house cats. He stopped inches from Midas. Up close, the god smelled of ozone and fermentation, of life and decay perfectly balanced. Duty is a boring word for a boring virtue, Dionysus laughed, pouring himself a cup of wine from a nearby jug. The liquid turned a brilliant glowing ruby color as it touched his cup. You are many things, Midas of Phrygia, but you are not merely dutiful. I can smell the ambition on you. It reeks stronger than the wine. Midas stiffened. I am a king who worries for his legacy. Legacy, Dionysus mused, swirling the wine. A mortal word for fear. You fear being forgotten. You fear the rot of time. The god took a sip, his eyes never leaving Midas. But I am not here to judge your soul. I am here to balance the scales. You returned my teacher to me unharmed and happy. The Olympians do not like to be in debt to mortals. It itches. The moment had arrived, the pivot point of Midas's life. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ask, Dionysus said, spreading his arms wide. Ask for a boon, King Midas. Anything within my power, and my power is vast. Do you want your vineyards to never wither? Do you want your enemies to fall into madness? Do you want a harem of nymphs? Speak, and it is yours.
Midas's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had rehearsed this. He had spent 10 nights awake, staring at the ceiling, refining the wording. He knew what men usually asked for: long life, victory in war, the love of a beautiful woman. But those things faded. Life ended, victories were forgotten, beauty wrinkled. Midas wanted something absolute, something that defied the natural order of decay. I do not want wine, Midas began, his voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. Wine is sweet, but it turns to vinegar. I do not want the madness of your enemies, for enemies always return. I do not want women, for I have a daughter, and she is the only love my heart requires. Dionysus cocked his head, intrigued. You are rejecting the gifts of the flesh? How uncharacteristic for a man of your appetite. I seek permanence, Lord, Midas said. He took a step closer to the god. I look at my kingdom, and I see things that break. The walls crumble, the tapestries fade, the flowers die in the winter. Even this palace, which I have built with such care, will one day be dust. All things must end, Dionysus said, his voice dropping an octave, suddenly somber. That is the beauty of it. The grape must be crushed to make the wine. The winter must come so the spring can return. To resist change is to resist life. I do not want to resist it, Midas said, his eyes burning with a manic light. I want to master it. I want to hold the power of the sun in my hands. The sun never decays, it never rusts, it shines forever. Dionysus narrowed his eyes. You speak in riddles, king. Speak plainly. Midas took a deep breath. He looked at the golden heavy rings on his fingers, the gold trim of the god's sandals, the golden eyes of the leopards. Gold, Midas whispered. The word felt heavy and delicious on his tongue. It is the only thing in this world that is immortal. It does not tarnish, it does not age, it is pure. He looked up, meeting the god's gaze directly. Grant me this, Lord Dionysus. Grant that whatsoever I touch with my body shall be turned into yellow, shining gold. The silence that followed was absolute. The leopards stopped grooming themselves. The maenads ceased their swaying. Even the wind seemed to die down, as if nature itself was recoiling at the request. Dionysus did not smile. The playfulness vanished from his face, replaced by an ancient, weary wisdom. He looked at Midas not with anger, but with a profound pay. Gold, Dionysus repeated flatly. You ask to turn the living world into cold metal. I ask for wealth, Midas argued, his desperation leaking through. Infinite wealth. With it I can make Phrygia the greatest kingdom the world has ever seen. I can build monuments that will never fall. I can ensure my daughter, Marigold, never knows a moment of want or suffering. I can buy armies, safety, immortality. You equate gold with safety? Dionysus asked softly. You think metal can shield you from fate? It is power, Midas snapped, losing his composure. And power is the only safety there is. Dionysus sighed, a sound like autumn leaves scraping over stone. He took another sip of his wine. I have offered you a boon. I am bound by the river Styx to grant it, but I will give you a chance to retract it, Midas. This wish, it is a heavy thing. It is not a gift, it is a burden. It is a closing of doors. I do not retract it, Midas said quickly, terrified the offer would be withdrawn. I am sure, I am ready. You want to freeze the world, the god said. You want to take the fluid, changing, dying, beautiful world and make it static. Very well. Dionysus stepped forward. He did not touch Midas. He simply leaned in, his face inches from the king's. Midas could see the galaxy swirling in the god's eyes. "The wish is granted," Dionysus said. His voice was no longer human. It was the voice of the earth, deep and resonant. But not tonight. Tonight is for the dark, and gold belongs to the sun. When the first ray of dawn kisses the earth tomorrow, your power will awaken. Whatever you touch shall become the metal you love so much. Midas felt a surge of triumph so potent it nearly brought him to his knees. He had done it. He had swindled a god. He had secured the ultimate power. "Thank you, Lord," Midas gasped. "You are generous." "I am merely consistent," Dionysus said enigmatically. He turned his back on the king. "Come, Silenus, let us leave this place. The air here has become metallic." The satyr hoisted himself up, stumbling slightly, and looked at Midas one last time. There was no drunken joy in Silenus's eyes now, only a sharp, sorrowful intelligence. He shook his head slowly, then followed his master. As quickly as they had arrived, the procession vanished into the deepening night. The music faded, the leopards dissolved into the shadows. The scent of ozone dissipated, leaving behind only the smell of the roses. Midas was alone on the terrace. He looked at his hands. They looked the same, fleshy, weathered, mortal hands. He reached out and touched the stone railing. It remained stone. He touched a rose. It remained soft and velvety. Tomorrow, he thought, at dawn. He could not sleep. How could a man sleep on the eve of his apotheosis? Midas paced the halls of his palace all night. He walked through the gallery where portraits of his ancestors hung. He looked at them with a sneer. They had been rich, yes, but they had been limited. They had to tax the peasants, mine the earth, trade with neighbors. Midas would bypass all of that. He would be the mine. He would be the economy. He went to the nursery. He stood by the door of his daughter's room. Marigold was sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. Her hair, the color of spun honey, fanned out over the pillow. "For you," Midas whispered to the sleeping girl, "I will build you a world where nothing can hurt you, a world where you are a princess of pure gold." He imagined her waking up in a bed made of solid bullion, wearing dresses spun from gold thread. He imagined the suitors that would come from the ends of the earth, not for her land, but for the sheer legend of her father. He would protect her. He would make her the most valuable creature in existence. He did not kiss her forehead. He dared not risk it, even though the dawn was hours away. He pulled his hand back, the superstition taking root. He returned to the garden as the sky began to lighten. The transition from night to day had never felt so slow. The gray pre-dawn light washed over the kingdom, colorless and flat. Midas stood by a large oak tree, his hand hovering over a low-hanging branch. He waited. He watched the eastern horizon. The mountains were jagged silhouettes against the brightening sky. Then the first sliver of the sun broke the line of the earth. A ray of pure, blinding light shot across the valley, hitting the palace dome. The moment of truth. Midas closed his fingers around the oak branch. He expected thunder. He expected pain. He expected a choir of angels, or the roar of demons. There was no sound. There was only a sensation. A sudden cold heaviness. A ripple of color shot from his fingertips. It wasn't a paint or a coating. It was a fundamental transmutation. The rough bark of the oak branch turned smooth and cold. The green leaves stiffened, flashing with a brilliant metallic luster. The gray wood became a heavy, yellow solid. In the span of a heartbeat, the entire branch, down to the finest vein in the smallest leaf, was solid. 24-karat gold. Midas gasped, pulled his hand back. The branch did not sway. It hung heavy and rigid, weighing down the rest of the tree. It caught the morning light and exploded with a brilliance that hurt the eyes. He stared at his hand. It looked normal. He flexed his fingers. They felt energized, buzzing with a strained, cold electricity. He reached down and picked up a stone from the path. Clink. The stone became a nugget of gold in his palm. He touched a clump of dirt. Flash. It became gold dust. He ran to the fountain. He plunged his hand into the water. Silence. The splashing stopped. The water around his fingers froze. Not into ice, but into a sculpture of flowing golden gold. The ripples hardened instantly. Midas threw his head back and laughed. It was a jagged, hysterical sound that tore through the quiet morning. "It works," he screamed at the rising sun. "It works." He ran toward the palace, his robes flapping behind him. He touched a marble pillar as he passed. It turned to a golden column worthy of Olympus. He touched the heavy wooden doors. They transformed into gates of solid gold, so heavy they groaned on their hinges. He was a god. He was a creator. He was Midas the Golden. He rushed into the great hall, his mind racing with possibilities. He would turn the furniture to gold. He would turn the plates to gold. He would peel the paint from the walls and replace it with the metal of kings. But as he ran, he did not notice the trail he left behind. The grass he had stepped on was now sharp golden blades that would not grow back. The insects he had brushed against had fallen as tiny, lifeless golden trinkets. The world around him was brightening, yes, but it was also dying. He reached the dining hall, breathless and ecstatic.